In episode 3, Joel and Ellie are 10 miles west of Boston. Joel is still processing the loss of Tess, and he's taking it out on Ellie a little bit. Ellie will try to make small talk. Joel just doesn't even answer. Finally, it gets to the point where Ellie yells at him and says, "Nobody made you do this. You made a choice in this, so don't blame me for something that isn't my fault." While Joel doesn't acknowledge it, he knows that she's right. They then continue to make the 5-mile hike to Bill and Frank's. 5 miles is a lot of time to kill, and Ellie starts quizzing Joel, question after question. Like, for example, Joel has a scar in his head, and Ellie asks what it was from, and he says, "Someone shot at me and missed." Every single answer that Joel gives is with a tone that says, "Please stop asking me more questions." But Ellie doesn't really pick up on this, or she just doesn't care. They stop off at a rundown gas station that Joel has visited in the past. He's got some stuff stashed there that he has to pick up. It's been a couple of years since Joel has been here, though, so he kind of forgets about where he stashed the stuff. This gives Ellie a little bit of free time to look around and see if she can find anything. She goes into a back room and she finds an opening to the basement of the building. She does find one thing of use: tampons. That'll help. But then she hears an infected scream. The good news is the infected is trapped under rubble, but it's still alive. Ellie gets super close to it, examining it, cutting its forehead a little bit, and then finally killing it. Ellie returns to the top, and it's time to go. On the journey, Joel is reminded just how young Ellie is. They come across a plane crash, and Ellie is just fascinated by the idea of planes. She's blown away that Joel actually flew in one at one point, because ever since she's known the world, planes weren't a thing. Because of this sparks a conversation about how the Cordyceps outbreak even started. Ellie brings up a good question. If you have to be bit to be infected, who bit the first person? And to that, Joel doesn't have an answer. But he does tell her the theory out there that Cordyceps mutated, it got into the food supply like grain, and it got sent all over the world. Within a week, people that have eaten that grain get infected, it spreads, and thus you've got what they're living in now. A couple hours later, they arrive at Bill and Frank's, and Bill and Frank have an interesting backstory. Bill was a prepper, so when the Cordyceps virus hit, they were escorting people out of the neighborhood to a safe quarantine zone, but Bill wasn't going to go. He ended up hunkering down, avoiding the military transport, and just staying there. And nobody knew because nobody was around. He had prepared his entire life for this, but he still went around town collecting extra supplies just to make sure that he was ready for the long haul. He even went so far as to set up a fence around the town so he would be safe and secure. At this point, he was the only person living in this town, but he was completely self-sufficient. Water, electricity, food, everything. And it was all protected by an electric fence that he set up. But while he had planned for all of this, what Bill didn't plan for was Frank. Frank fell into one of his trapped holes. Bill approached Frank at gunpoint, suspicious of who he was, but it became clear pretty quickly that Frank was really no threat. Frank told Bill that he was trying to find the Boston quarantine zone. He had come from the Baltimore quarantine zone, but that thing fell. Even though he was suspicious, Bill let Frank up out of the hole. He gave him directions on how to get to Boston, but Frank started asking for food. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He was starving. Bill knew that if he gave Frank food, he might have to deal with more people coming, but Frank was pretty persuasive, and Bill hadn't talked to anybody in a long time, so he let him in the house. He lets Frank shower. He gives him food. He even gives him wine. Slowly, Frank starts to chisel away at Bill's rough exterior. Frank did have plans on leaving, but he didn't. He ends up staying. And Bill and Frank end up hooking up. It was the first time that Bill had ever been with a man before, but he slowly fell in love with Frank. The two were complete polar opposites, but they were the only people left in their little community. Bill was okay with this. He was fine living alone with Frank. In fact, he didn't want to be with anybody else. He didn't want to know anybody else. He didn't want to talk to anybody else. He was fine being a recluse. That wasn't Frank, though. Frank needed other people. He wanted other people. He didn't see the inherent evil in others like Bill did. Bill always assumed the worst, but Frank always assumed the best. So eventually, Frank decided, you know what, screw this. I'm going to use that radio in the corner, and I'm going to start talking to people on the outside. That's how he found Tess. The first meeting between Bill and Tess and Frank was very awkward. Tess ended up bringing Joel along with her, and while they didn't like each other, Joel and Bill were pretty similar. They both assumed that the other party was up to no good, even though they weren't. They were just there to have a meal, like the old times. But as the years went on, they developed a friendship, sort of a frenemy situation. Bill never got to the point where he actually did like Joel, but he did get to the point where he respected him and appreciated him, and he used him to trade for things like medicine, supplies that maybe he didn't have. The relationship became pretty useful. This wasn't to say that throughout the years they didn't have their fair share of unwanted guests. While Fedra never visited them, raiders did. Bill had done a really good job of keeping the area fortified, with an electric fence, traps, and all that, but it still kept people coming. He had to fight them off. One such instance, he ended up getting shot, and it looked really bad. Bill thought he was on his deathbed and even told Frank, "Call Joel, he'll take care of you." But there was no need, because Bill ended up making a full recovery. Unfortunately, a few years later, the Big C ended up getting Frank. Bill tried to be positive about it, making it seem like Frank could overcome it, but finally, Frank got tired of listening to Bill and said, "Bill, this thing was incurable when the world was fine. The idea that they cured cancer? Now? Come on, man." One morning, Frank woke up and he decided, this is it. This could be my last day on Earth. I can't live like this anymore. Bill tried to talk him out of it, but it didn't work. Instead, he decided to spend the last remaining day with Frank, doing everything Frank loved to do. It was tough. It was emotional. And towards dinner, Bill decided to make a decision himself. The plan was to crush a bunch of pills up into Frank's drink. Frank drinks it, and he falls asleep and dies. But Bill wasn't going to let Frank die alone. After both of them drink the spiked wine, Bill revealed his plan to Frank. He tells him this isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied with my life. And you were my purpose. They both went upstairs a short while later and passed away. A few months later, Joel and Ellie show up. As Joel is looking all over for Bill or Frank, Ellie finds the note. The letter was basically addressed to Joel, because as the letter states, he's the only one who would have made it inside unharmed. Bill gives Joel the bunker code that has all of the ammunition and anything he might need and says, "Take it." He also ends the note by saying, "I never really liked you, but still, it's like we're friends, and I respect you. So I'm going to tell you something that probably you will be the only person to understand. I used to hate the world, and I was happy when everybody died. But I was wrong. There was one person worth saving. And that's what I did. I saved him, and I protected him. And that's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do, and God help anyone who stands in our way. That's why I'm leaving you everything. My guns, my equipment. Use them to keep Tess safe." While Joel knows that it's too late for that, he knows that he can keep Ellie safe. He also knows that now he found a truck with a battery. That's because Bill had a truck and he left him the key, although he does have to build the battery. As the battery is charging, Joel walks back inside and has Ellie show him her arm. While it does look like it was bitten, it doesn't look like it's affecting her at all. With the confirmation that Ellie is in fact immune, Joel tells her that he has a brother in Wyoming. He's heading out there to find him, and he'll take her along. He used to be a Firefly, so Joel's best guess is he'll at least know where some of them are out west. He does put down a series of rules. The first one is don't bring up Tess, ever. The second one is don't tell anybody about the immunity, the bite, none of it. The third rule is do what he says when he says it. They then go through the house, stocking up, taking a shower, getting new clothes. Ellie does find a gun, which she pockets, doesn't tell Joel about it. And a little while later, both of them are on their way out west. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.